These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down, and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention Riot Girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections. Wow, there is so much going on in the world today. Welcome to our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. In our third hour, I've got just an absolutely amazing, crazy alert for you. I don't even want to go through the details right now. It's just like, how stupid can it's the latest insanity from the Trump followers and just the crazies. I'll tell you about that in our third hour. Along with this question, is Ron Death-Santis or Ron DeSantis, is he actually going to be the new Trump? There's some amazing DeSantis news. I'll share that with you in the third hour. In our second hour, Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding is going to drop by, talking about what's the latest news about the Delta variant, what's the latest news about boosters, what do we need to know, and he's an immunologist. What is going on, and what should you and I be doing about this? Should we be showing up at the pharmacy and saying, "Gimme"? And Trump and his death cult are planning a super spreader event for Saturday, and he's going to be bringing the Delta variant Kool-aid. I'll tell you all about that in our second hour. But I want to start out this first hour today I'm going to get to Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, and what Fox News is all about on this right after the break. But the op-ed that I wrote this morning over at HartmannReport.com, which is typically my opening rant for the program, is titled "The 9/11 Attack Wasn't an Act of War; It was a Crime." And I realize that this is semantics, right? It's semantics, a discussion of language. This is, what does a word mean? But in this case, the meaning of words has led, or the misuse of the meaning of words has led to at least 500,000 deaths in Afghanistan and Iraq, perhaps well over 1 million. Certainly, tens of millions of people having their lives turned upside down, being displaced, becoming homeless, becoming refugees, and thousands of American deaths. So the point that and I made it briefly yesterday, but I really wanted to amplify it today. In fact, I think yesterday when I mentioned it, I said, my yesterday's rant was about why Bush wanted to have his wars, and then I said, they're not even really wars; they're occupations, and so there's two very important definitions that if we don't get right for the historical record and for this moment about Afghanistan and Iraq, and frankly Vietnam as well, if we don't get these things right, we will be doomed to repeat them. The old saying that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We don't want to repeat this history. So let's just be very, very clear. When 9/11 happened, we were attacked by a small group of right-wing terrorists, right-wing Muslim terrorists, who were using Islam as their rationale for attacking us, in part. And that was Osama bin Laden and Sheikh Khalid Mohammed and Mohammed Atta, who died in one of the planes. Sheikh Khalid Mohammed was actually the guy who did the operational planning. He did it out of Peshawar, out of Pakistan, not Afghanistan. The government of Afghanistan had no idea this was going on or coming. It wasn't even planned in Afghanistan. It was planned in Pakistan, in Florida, and in Germany by Mohammed Atta and Sheikh Khalid Mohammed, and there's a couple others who were involved. And we've had these guys in Gitmo for years. Atta's dead, but we've had Sheikh Khalid Mohammed in Gitmo since 2003. We're still trying to try him because the court has now said because we tortured him, his confessions can't be used. But we know what happened here. So we had a crime. But George W. Bush wanted to be a wartime president. He wanted to have the powers that go along with a war. And, his father fought in World War II. His father was part of that generation. And so he very much wanted to be able to say, like Franklin Roosevelt said back in the day, the way that Roosevelt responded to the Pearl Harbor. This is Franklin Roosevelt.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
And that's pretty important, the Empire of Japan part of it, because, that's what happened. We were attacked by a sovereign nation, Japan, by their military. Their people were all in, their emperor was all in, their leader was all in. We were attacked by another country. And so FDR went to Congress and said, I want a war declaration, and Congress said, you've got it, buddy. And the Constitution says that only Congress can declare war. And there's a reason for that. James Madison laid it out. This is what Madison wrote. He said, in no part of the father of the Constitution, he said, in no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war or peace to the legislature and not to the executive department. In other words, not to the president. President cannot make war. He goes on to say, because the objection to such a mixture of heterogeneous power, the trust and the temptation would be too great for any one man. War is, in fact, the true nurse of executive aggrandizement. In war, a physical force is to be created, and it is the executive, the president, who will direct it. In war, the public treasuries are to be unlocked, and it is the executive hand which dispenses them. In war, the honors and emoluments of office are multiplied, and it is the executive, the president's patronage under which they are to be enjoyed. It is in war, finally, that laurels are to be gathered, and it is the executive brow that they encircle. The strongest passions, the most dangerous weaknesses of the human breast, ambition, avarice, vanity, the honorable or venal love of fame, are all in conspiracy against the desire and duty of peace. End of quote from James Madison. This is why we did not give war-making powers to the president in the Constitution. It is solely with Congress. Bush wanted a war. He went to Congress, but he couldn't ask for a war declaration because we weren't attacked by another country. So he asked for an authorization to use military force to specifically go after bin Laden. We took down the Taliban government. It took a couple of weeks. And now to definition number two. Now, in definition number one, 9/11 was not an act of war. It was a crime. A horrible, horrific, mind-boggling, obscene, 3,000 dead people crime. But it was a crime by a group of criminals, not by another country. Number two, we did have a war. It wasn't declared against us by any other nation, but we declared war on two countries using 9/11 as the pretext, Afghanistan and Iraq. And both of those wars ended in about a month. Both of them. We took down the Taliban government in about 3.5 weeks. We took down the Iraqi government in around 5 weeks, as I recall. Both of them in the neighborhood of a month. And that was when both wars ended. And what began was then an occupation for the next 20 years. Now, people will say, but wait a minute, people are still shooting at us. Yes, that happens in occupations. But occupations never end well. They just don't. I mean, ask the British about, their occupation of this continent in 1776. Ask the British about their occupation of India right up until 1947. People do not like their country being occupied by a foreign power. And bin Laden desperately needed George W. Bush to overreact and essentially, bomb some other country, rather than unite the police forces of the world, which is what many European nations were calling for. Let's use Interpol and get this guy. Or negotiate with the Taliban and get him. And the Taliban reached out repeatedly to the United States saying, we're ready to work with you to get bin Laden. And Bush was like, no, I want to have a war. I want to be a wartime president. For all the reasons that James Madison laid out. Bottom line, and I've been saying this for a while. I said it this morning in my rant over at HartmannReport.com, and I think it's really important. Far more deaths happened on both sides than would have happened if we had simply cooperated with the international community and done whatever was necessary to take out bin Laden. There might not have been one single American death. There might have only been a few dozen Afghan deaths or what. I mean, we would have had to have Pakistan collaborate with us, because both Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Osama bin Laden at the time of 9/11 were in Pakistan. They weren't even in Afghanistan. And like I said, the major planning for this took place in Venice, Florida, and in Germany, in Hamburg. But we're not going to bomb Florida. We're not going to bomb Germany. We're not going to bomb Pakistan. So who's left? Well, how about a country that doesn't even have an air force? They're so poor, the average income in the country is $2 a day. Let's bomb that country, the second poorest country in the world. You see, reality is important. Language is important. It's important that we be precise and clear about these things so that we don't make these stupid mistakes again. Or that we don't, I'm not even sure you can call it a mistake, so that we don't allow a future president to lie us into into another unnecessary war in response to something that was basically a crime. So, do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? What do we do about this?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, I was arguing this back in 2002. When this program went on the air, I was still arguing it in 2003. And welcome back. Bill in Sun City, Arizona. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
It says here you say 9/11 didn't actually happen. It was a film?
Well, think about it, Tom. Let's freeze frame here for a second. 1 second before the airplane struck the building. Okay.
I thought you said
Now
the
let's
airplanes
move.
didn't strike the buildings.
Well, the supposed airplane
Okay.
struck the building.
So my friend Jerry, who lives in New York City and saw all this happen, he was hallucinating?
Perhaps.
I've known him since the early 70s. He's my best friend. I believe him.
You know, the amount of time that you know somebody doesn't
Okay, so
preclude them
Bill,
from
what
lying to you.
happened? What happened if the planes didn't strike the buildings?
Okay. The nose cone struck the building. The softest part of that airplane struck steel reinforced concrete, steel rod reinforced concrete, and the supporting upright beams alongside it. What you saw wasn't the airplane striking the building. What you saw was the building absorbing the airplane. Should an airplane strike a building? An airplane struck the Empire State Building. They picked it up on the streets and avenues below. Should an airplane
Oh,
strike
Bill,
a
that's an
building?
entirely semantic argument.
How is that, Tom? I'm talking about the science.
You're
I'm
arguing
talking
about the meaning of the word struck. That's semantics.
What else did it do?
Well, I don't
Well,
disagree with you that the building absorbed the plane, but, it still
I'm
happened.
telling you what the film showed you. I'm not saying the building absorbed the plane. I'm saying what the film showed you. The discrepancy is in the film. As a matter of fact, there's a large number of discrepancies in the film. When a nose cone strikes a bird in flight, the nose cone bursts into pieces. That nose cone, not only did it strike the outside of that building, there's a part of the film that shows it coming through intact on the other side. What you saw was computer graphics imaging.
Yeah.
It
Bill,
left an airplane shape.
I'm not buying it, and I'm
Tom,
moving along. I'm sorry. It's just, there are limits. Carol in Menneson, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I have no response to what your previous caller said at all. I'm calling about. I'm rather angry about some of our press coverage, which is covering the leaving of Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Some of them are saying that, and this isn't just Fox Noise. So this is the ones you and I normally watch, are saying that we shouldn't have left because now our allies are going to say that we abandon our allies, and all across the world now our allies are going to say we abandoned them. And I think that's absurd. I mean, when was Afghanistan ever our ally to start with?
Exactly.
And secondly, this phony occupation for 20 years, all they did during that occupation, all they did was try to kill us to get us to leave.
Right. And name one
finally,
ally that we're occupying right now. I mean, yes, we have bases in Germany and Japan, but we're not occupying those countries. We're not running their governments. We're not telling them, how to do things. We're not providing, substantial. We're not providing any actually security for Germany or Japan. Those are simply, collaborative international military efforts in the event of international conflict.
Right, and also they're not trying to kill us to get us to leave.
Exactly, yeah. You're right, Carol. It's a complete BS argument, and it's astonishing that the media is carrying it. I saw John Bolton come on CNN this morning, and at that point I got up and turned off the TV and went and took a shower. I mean, it's like, oh my God. I mean, literally took a shower. Carol, thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at HartmannReport.com, and our podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts. Cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Okay, the irony. Right now, this is insane, right? The right wing has two talking points right at this moment. Number one, Biden screwed this all up, and look at the chaos in Afghanistan, and look at those people trying to get on that plane, and he botched the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's talking point number one. And there's actually, I think, a strong argument to be made that there's some truth to that. That the Biden administration knew this was coming. The Trump administration negotiated this a year and a half ago. They cut a deal with the Taliban. They did not involve the Afghan government. They did it over the objections of the Afghan government. They did it over the objections of the international community. Donald Trump himself talked with the guy who has now declared himself president of Afghanistan, the leader of the Taliban, who Donald Trump ordered released from prison in Pakistan. That's the guy who's now running the Taliban in Afghanistan. Trump personally cut a deal with this guy, telling him that he would be in charge of the country starting May 1st of this year. And so, as I told you yesterday, and as actually Rachel was talking about this last night, it was the first time I'd seen it in the mainstream media. But I told you this story yesterday. All over Afghanistan, as a result of that deal, as soon as that deal was cut a year and a half ago by Trump, the Taliban started going into every community in Afghanistan and saying, be cool, keep your guns, you're working for the government, just keep pretending that everything's good, but we're going to come back, and when we come back, just lay down your weapons and we won't kill you and your family. But keep taking that money from America for the moment. And that's exactly what happened. And the president of Afghanistan got on a plane and fled, which President Biden yesterday was complaining about with some justification. The president of Afghanistan gets on a plane and flees, and that's the cue to the Afghan military. Hey, you've got no leadership anymore. You've got nobody supporting you anymore. Hand your weapons over to the Taliban and, pray that they don't take retribution on you, because they've said they won't. And now, so that's the one message. One message coming out of the right wing is, Biden botched it. The second message that's coming out of the right wing is, oh my God, there's brown people who are Muslims that they want to bring to America. You'll recall after 9/11, we were hearing this kind of stuff. This is Michael Savage from back in the day about the people who hit us on 9/11 and about the people in Afghanistan and Iraq.
When I see a woman...
Should we start that?
When I see a woman walking around with a burqa...
Here,
when I see a woman walking around with a burqa, I see a Nazi. That's what I see. How do you like that? A hateful Nazi would like to cut your throat and kill your children. Don't give me this crap that they're doing it out of a sacred ritual or rite. It's not required by the Quran that a woman walk around in the 7th century drape. She's doing it to spit in your face.
So that's that, and then of course this.
The bloodthirsty religion is practiced over there by a bunch of throwbacks, and we're to kill them.
We're going to kill him, right? So that was then. That was back early on in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And here's last night, Laura Ingraham. Is it really our responsibility to welcome thousands of unvetted refugees from Afghanistan? Well, she doesn't quite come out and say it like Tucker Carlson does. The whole replacement theory, it's an invasion. He said, and I quote last night, "We will see many refugees from Afghanistan resettle in our countries in coming months, probably in your neighborhood. And over the next decade, that number may swell to the millions. So first we invade, and then we are invaded. Brown people are coming. Oh my God, Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham are frantic. Are you?" We'll be back with your calls right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We have to achieve a clear understanding of how we got into this mess if we're ever going to avoid it in the future.
Clear.
Thank you.
That first book was a
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carragnondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty two-stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and three-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support our program, and it's this one's a geeky science one. And it's about this little snippet of genetic material, what's called microRNA. And the name of this one is called MIR1, M-I-R-1. And we've known for years that when muscles are used, when I'm talking about, you know, exercise to the point where you feel fatigue in your muscles, that when exercises are when muscles are exercised, it depletes them of MIR1. What they didn't know is where that MIR1 goes and what it does. And it turns out that our fat cells draw the MIR1 in from the muscles, and it causes the fat cells to start converting themselves into fatty acids that can be used to feed the muscles. So we're not just building muscle, but we're also reducing fat in our body. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm going into depth on it in this new video. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Okay, let me just be very, very clear, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Just a very short note here, but let me just be very, very clear about what's going on the right. There is this theory based on a book called Camp of the Saints that is widely read across people on the hard right, the racist hard right. And it's called the Great Replacement Theory. And the idea is that white people are being replaced in the United States and across Western nations. This book was actually originally written in French and published in France. The edition in the United States is an American translation. And that this is an intentional act to, quote, destroy Western civilization, which means white Christian civilization, and replace it with brown and Muslim and black and whatever, right? Just, it's not white people. And this is why the guys were chanting in Charlottesville, "You will not replace us." And what he was saying is that, what they were saying was, you as a culture, and then the next chant was, "Jews will not replace us," and that was a specific reference to George Soros. Because part of the Great Replacement Theory is that George Soros, being a Jewish billionaire who funds pro-democracy projects around the world, that he was like one of the grand wizards, one of the grand leaders of the Great Replacement Project to do away with white people. And Trump was like, oh, they're very fine people, and they've got a point. And basically, Donald Trump and his followers are all in on the Great Replacement Theory. So with that in mind, listen to what Tucker Carlson said last night on Fox so-called News. Quote, The people, and by the way, you can read this at MediaMatters.org. The people who made the Afghan occupation possible would like to see a lot more of our southern border, much more unrestrained immigration to the U.S. Bring in the refugees, they're screaming, tonight. That's the only lesson they're taking from this debacle. There's lots of time to spare as Americans die of fentanyl ODs and millions of foreign nationals whose identities we can't confirm moved here. But when it comes to bringing Afghans to our country, there's no time to spare. And then he goes on. He says, so we're getting it. And if history is any guide, and it's always a guide, we will see many refugees from Afghanistan resettle in our country in coming months, probably in your neighborhood. And over the next decade, that number may swell to the millions. So first we invade, and then we are invaded. In other words, brown people, people who are not necessarily Christian, but in particular, they're not white people, are coming to America, and they're going to replace us. This is just, astonishing. So, anyway, your thoughts on this. Israel in Chandler, Arizona. Hey, Israel, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I've been consuming the news just as you and everybody else over the last few days and everything. And one of the things that I always like to do is just kind of, once I've consumed in what's going on in these 2 days, is start drawing a line going backwards and see how this ties to other things. And I think you've talked a lot about that in terms of going back to 9/11, our reaction to that, and what we did in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Once in a while, I like to take what I call a 30,000-foot view. And I think that all of this goes all the way back to the beginning of this country. Number one, the ink wasn't dry on our Constitution when we were already behaving like an empire, pushing west, pushing native populations out, massacring them. And that has continued on and on and on. And there are very, very few instances where we really needed to go to war. Pearl Harbor is one indication for me. But most other times, and especially in our lifetime, I can't think of a single war that we have gone to that we needed to for the security of our country. Yep. And I think that until we come to terms with the fact that we've been behaving like an empire, well, as long as we continue to do that, our democracy is in peril. One thing is tied to another in my mind.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you, Israel. I would fine-tune it a little bit and maybe even take it a step farther than what you're saying. Because the great lesson, if you look at how, for example, the British Empire functioned from the 1700s to the mid-20th century, or how for that matter, how the French or the Dutch or the Portuguese empires functioned when they were empires, or the Roman Empire, for that matter. Yes, they would invade other countries, but they would very quickly create essentially collaborative agreements with those countries. We will build roads in India, the British said. If in exchange you will pick cotton and send the cotton to England to be made into clothing. They integrated their economies with the countries that they had conquered. The countries adopted their language. When I worked in Uganda, people were no longer speaking Bantu. They were speaking English, right? It was an English colony. The same in India. There's over 700 languages in India, but the dominant one is English because it was dominated by the United Kingdom for so long. So, even the countries that have behaved as empires historically have not done it as stupidly as we did in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq.
Correct. I agree. Yeah.
And I think that, just being an empire is really out of fashion. I mean, it just, in the 21st century, it doesn't work. It hasn't, and frankly, I don't think it worked in the 20th century. This is stuff that should have been left behind in the 19th century and before. And frankly, I mean, you could argue very strongly it never should have happened at all.
Yes.
But for all practical purposes, it's just like not even possible anymore. And then we get to these definitional things. What is an act of war? What does war mean? Why are we engaged in military conflicts without a congressional declaration of war? The last one we had was World War II, and we've been involved in all kinds of these things. Another guy, I need to go back and edit my op-ed from yesterday. Another time we were lied into war was Ronald Reagan in Grenada. I mean, that war lasted, 2 days? But, it was like Reagan said, oh, my God, they're coming for the students, the American students at the medical school in Grenada. Who is they? Well, it was, I'm forgetting his name now, but the president of that country was of Grenada was like, we're going to have a national health care system for everybody in the country, and we're going to institute national unionization, and Reagan said, that's communism. You can't have that. That's what he was trying to save the students from. And I mean, it's like this is nuts. Anyhow, Israel.
I think if I could just one quick thought. I think how we come to terms with our history and how that determines us moving forward will go a long way towards whether or not we are a Britain, meaning we realize we can't control this empire and establish a relationship, as you've indicated, with the countries, with other countries around the world, or we disappear like the Roman Empire did, overcome by peoples from other lands. Yeah. And, those are the choices before us.
I think you're absolutely right. And let us not forget that when the Roman Empire collapsed, it was bloody, it was horrible, it lasted generations, it was a god-awful mess, and we don't want that here. Israel, thank you for the call. Very, very well said. Robert in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I remembered from day one when you spoke about this being a police action, and that was the same point of view that I had. But
you're talking about back in 2003 when I first went on the air on this?
Yes, and also 2001 when the station was located somewhere else.
Oh, I wasn't on the air in 2001, but I was writing op-eds about it, mostly for commondreams.org.
Yeah, it was a criminal act by a group of by radical militia and so forth. And I thought that war was too ennobling of a thing to declare on them.
Yep.
And the thing that I realized that was going on was the hatred, especially the hatred for people that are, quote, not us, that attacked us. Right. And we wanted vengeance. We didn't care. And we felt humiliated and so forth. And we got into a situation because we know that there's a lot of hatred for those people, quote, others or whatever. And it would be easy to shed their blood to make us look good or to save face. And we went into this thing, and we can't look at how racism drives American foreign policy. Right. I mean, all across the world, because we haven't done, and it continues to. And unfortunately, it's put us in this position. We're not going to change their gods. We're not going to change their beliefs. We're not going to change anything. Okay, they don't want it. Right. They reject it. They have their culture and so forth, and we should have known better. Yeah. And like you said, it should be called an occupation.
Yeah. Well, it has been an occupation. I mean, when Bush declared mission accomplished, he was right. The war was over. It had turned into an occupation, into a 20-year occupation, or in the case of Iraq, an 18-year occupation. But Robert, very, very, very right on the point. Thank you very much. Very well said. 45 minutes past the hour. Picking up your thoughts on this. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The war was over in a month. In both Iraq and Afghanistan, we are ending a 20-year occupation. And welcome back. Scott in Portland. Hey, Scott, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. Oh, the quick one. Your first caller, Bill, I think it was, the thing about the building absorbing the airplane. I guess if we go back and watch the old Zapruder films, what we're actually seeing is JFK's body absorbing the bullets.
Exactly. That's why I said it's just semantics. Although I'm arguing semantics today in my definitions of war and occupation, so I can't just ridicule semantics, but nonetheless.
Sure. Well, I think that all these countries we're talking about, we'll say Afghanistan. The Afghans could have very well been marching in the streets saying Americans will not replace us.
Yeah. They were. That's for 20 years.
Right. Oh, we did. We had them under our boot, and then all that money. I was just going back and rereading some of the Senate hearing or the House hearings in 2014. and there's all these same people, cast of characters, Jim Jordan and all these guys, Devin Nunes, and they're all just hammering on how much this is costing and building up this embassy with all this concrete and all this office furniture and stuff, and then we just walk away from it.
Right.
It's so sad. But yeah, the hypocrisy on the right is just stunning, and I don't know how we can ever get around it. I don't see that we can.
I think we have to tell the truth, Scott. That's my big appeal with this program and with these pieces that I've been writing, is that we start to tell the truth about who we are. I mean, this is the whole argument around critical race theory too. You've got a right wing that doesn't want America to tell the truth about its past, and now doesn't want America to tell the truth about its present. And I think that the best way that you avoid making a mistake in the future is acknowledging the mistake in the past. Scott, thank you. I've got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Michael in Birmingham, Alabama. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller. I'm addicted to your show.
Thank you. Nice to hear from you. What's on your mind?
I was listening to Joe Biden, whom I voted for, and I was thoroughly embarrassed and ashamed. I'm a veteran. I served in the military 3 years. I did a tour in Afghanistan. But Biden took a page out of Trump's notebook. He changed the narrative. We weren't upset. The people were not upset because he pulled out. They were upset because the evacuation, it was botched.
I know, and he completely avoided discussing that. And afterwards, numerous commentators pointed that out. Right-wingers are going after him for it. He's going to have to clean that up.
Yeah, he didn't. He blamed everybody except himself. Yeah. And can I share a story with you?
We have 30 seconds, Michael, until we hit a break.
Okay.
Go for it.
I was stationed in Jalalabad, and we were working on aircraft. And adjacent to us was the Afghani aircraft. And we were told that not to share water in 115-degree weather, not to share water with the local nationals because their government would supply them. They had no water, and we were out there amongst each other. One of the Afghans came over to me, and he signaled to me that he was thirsty. And I was told by my superiors not to give him water. What do you think I did?
Did you give him the water?
I gave him water. I did.
Good on you, Michael. Yeah. Michael, I'm sorry we're hitting the break here, and I've got to wrap it up. But thank you for being a first-time caller. Thanks for the call. I hope we can talk again in the future. Thank you very much, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, back in the after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies. There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at thomhartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jeff in Manchester, New Hampshire. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, one thing that's been on my mind about the evacuation of Afghanistan is the fact that at first, when we went in there and we captured it, with the Northern Alliance, the Afghans were liberated. They were happy when we were taking off their burqas. They loved us. And then all of a sudden, Bush decided that oh, Afghanistan doesn't have any oil. Let's go into Iraq instead and say it's because of weapons of mass destruction.
Right. You're absolutely right, Jeff. And in fact, one of the newsletters I subscribed to, I think it might have been Eric Bollert's this morning, was talking about how the collapse of our relationship or our ability to work with Afghanistan came about as a result of Bush pulling troops out of Afghanistan and moving them over to Iraq. And,
why?
Go ahead.
Yeah, why as much as I was against the Iraq war anyway, couldn't we have finished one war before we went into another? I mean, if we had just got, followed through with what we started with at the beginning, Afghanistan would be a totally different place right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Jeff. Thank you very much for the call. And thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM. Dave in Holland, Michigan. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to it was just interesting to watch or to hear that the men and these quote-unquote soldiers fighting for their country were that fought for 5 minutes or less. Didn't it seem like they really didn't have anything? Not only were they not
I don't know who this they is you're talking about.
But meaning the government forces that we trained for 20 years.
Oh, in Afghanistan.
Didn't it seem? I mean, did they not really have anything really to give up their lives for? Their lives aren't going to be a lot different. It's the women's rights that are really what's changed there, right? Men are just. This is They've all. It's always been like.
Well, and I suspect an awful lot of the Afghan men are just fine with women going back to the burqa and going back to the way things were.
Exactly. And second, does anyone really with a straight face think that the previous administration would care one lick about the brown-skinned people from the crap hole countries?
Right.
Like, I mean, they're probably flipping over in their living rooms right now thinking there might be anybody who are going to bring into the country from Afghanistan, save them or not.
Right.
Anyway,
well, we've already got, the two top hosts on, or two of the three top hosts on Fox News last night going off on, basically here comes the brown-skinned invasion, here comes the great replacement. And it's amazing.
It's terrible.
It really is.
Tom.
Dave, thank you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. Joan in Nashville, Tennessee. Joan, your thoughts?
Yes, Tom, I was thinking about the fear of white people being replaced by people of color. And I'm thinking that it isn't just people of color coming into this country. It's really white people's fear of genetic annihilation, because whiteness is a biological recessive trait. And if you notice that when white people procreate with people of color, the product of that union usually has more of the features, including sometimes the skin color of the parent of color. So white people really do have a fear, a genuine fear of being replaced.
Yeah.
Because if they ever stop aggressing against people of color and let nature take its course, then over a century or two or a generation or two, white people will no longer exist in their present state.
At least as white people. And I completely agree with you, Joan. And that's why this whole definition of whiteness thing at law and at culture, which we really got a huge boost in the 1640s here in the United States when Virginia, but from 1640 to 1720, Virginia changed all these laws about what whiteness meant to try to empower basically poor white people and create a cultural wall against the people who were being brought here in chains, to work in plantations. We invented whiteness, and it's a cultural construct, and it's time for it to disintegrate, basically.
Well, what do you think if white people were able to actually admit that and voice that and deal with the anxieties that come with that? I don't think people of color, and I know black people, don't want to do away with white people. We just want to live like white people live.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think that that's the subtext of the whole Great Replacement theory. You see these white supremacist militias out there running around with their guns freaking out. What they're expressing is fear. And I think you really put your finger on it, Joan. Joan, thank you very much for the call. We're out of time here. Thank you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated, waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you in the second hour of our program. On the line with us, Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, the epidemiologist and health economist, adjunct senior fellow at the American Federation of Scientists. I follow him on Twitter, where he's got one of the better Twitter feeds, or whatever you call it. You know, if you want to be updated on what's going on with this pandemic, his Twitter handle is Dr. Eric E-R-I-C Ding, D-I-N-G, D-R-E-R-I-C-D-I-N-G. Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, welcome back to the program. So I'm reading a whole bunch of stuff all over the internet. You know, the Delta variant has made herd immunity impossible. You know, what do we know about this Delta variant? You know, young people are getting sick. You know, ICUs and children's hospitals are filling up. It seems like it's almost a brand new disease.
Yeah, it is a bit. I call it pandemic 2.0 because it is so many ways it is worse than before. It is more contagious, twice as contagious. When I say twice, I mean like exponentially twice. Instead of, one person passing on to 3 or 4, it's now one person passing on to 6 to 9 per each additional cycle. And it's much more severe. It's for unvaccinated, it's about 4 times greater risk of hospitalization. And even among those who are infected, it is much more severe than before. There's a lot more breakthrough cases than before. And obviously, even with breakthroughs, the hospitalization efficacy prevention with the vaccines is lower than before. Instead of 99, it's now like 90% protection against hospitalization. And again, kids are also infected a lot more than the old strain. So altogether, it's kind of like the worst of both worlds that is much more contagious and more severe and more vaccine penetrant.
So I got a note this morning from my best friend who lives in Manhattan, has his whole life, and he's my age more or less, in his 70s, mm-hmm. And he went into his pharmacy this morning and said, "I'm old, and I want a booster, I want a 3rd shot," and they were like, "Cool," and they whipped it out and stuck it in his arm. It seems that this is happening, this booster thing, and the government is talking about making it official. What's the deal? What does the epidemiology tell us? What does science tell us about whether people who are over 60 should get a 3rd shot, or whether people who are on medication that suppresses things like rheumatoid arthritis or plaque psoriasis, and therefore it suppresses the entire immune system, should get a 3rd shot, or or whatever? I mean, what's the deal?
Definitely. I definitely, there's a lot of evidence that there's waning immunity, both over time as well as among the elderly. The efficacy was always a little bit weaker in the elderly, and especially the immunocompromised. So even if you're not elderly, you have taking immunosuppressive drugs, have certain conditions like blood cancers, you should definitely get another shot. So the FDA in the U.S. officially recommended a 3rd shot for those with these immune conditions. But in other countries like Israel, they're already starting the shot for the elderly as well. And many European countries are also starting a 3rd shot for anyone over the age of 50 or 60, 65. So it's definitely something you need. And the other thing is, once you're over 6 months, there is significant waning. And that we've seen it not just in elderly, but also young people. So there's about the breakthrough rates are twice as high if you're fully vaccinated in January or earlier versus fully vaccinated recently. So it is an issue. And, if you're recently vaccinated and you're young, I wouldn't worry about it. If you're elderly and, your last shot was 5 or 6 months ago, I would start considering another shot, even though it's not officially recommended in the U.S., but it's widely done worldwide.
Yeah, and so apparently there's not a downside to this. People aren't getting horrible reactions to the 3rd shot or things like that. No. They
already had 2 shots. Like if you had reactions, it would have already happened earlier.
What about I've seen actually multiple articles in the pop press, about people who are trying to mix and match people who got the Pfizer vaccine, and now they're trying to get the J&J because it's a different technology. It's a different, and it targets a different part of the immune system.
It's like a maybe issue, because there is evidence that if you went from, for example, AstraZeneca to Pfizer, the benefits are stronger than if you got 2 AstraZenecas. Although that doesn't happen in the U.S. because we don't have AstraZeneca. Mm-hmm. But there is some evidence that, Moderna, interestingly, has a little bit higher protection against Delta than Pfizer. Mm-hmm. We don't know if it's because Moderna people were always asked to delay their 2nd shot by 4 weeks, while Pfizer, the 2nd shot could come within 3 weeks. So we don't know if the difference is due to that reason or because they're very similar vaccines.
Yeah.
Now, the Johnson & Johnson is obviously a little bit more different, but Johnson & Johnson by itself is, if you were doing a 1-shot to 1-shot before, Pfizer, Moderna always had the higher 1-shot efficacy versus Johnson & Johnson. But it is a strategy some people are doing. I don't recommend it because there's not much data on it. But I think the third shot right now that most people are doing is a third shot of the mRNA. And mixing Moderna and Pfizer is pretty common in many countries.
What does all this tell us about life in this world going forward, Dr. Feigl-Ding? You and I, last time we talked about the difference between endemic and pandemic and epidemic. Yeah. Any new thoughts on that?
It's one of those things we're trying to work our way through because there's if we have highly vaccinated populations, I think we could keep it suppressed and not have it run wild, and occasionally have a few hospitalizations with some rare breakthrough cases. But in many ways, if half the population, like the U.S., especially in the Deep South, more than half, are not vaccinated, then the actual number of hospital beds and deaths and long COVID, don't forget, you get even if you don't get hospitalized, is going to be this mounting astronomical burden that will just accumulate.
Sort of like polio
so I
was
think
in the 50s.
We're at a fork in the road between what kind of future do we want, and the other thing is, you say, oh, we go build natural immunity. But yeah, we did that before, but then Delta came. And now there's also other things like Lambda. And, Israel says if Lambda surges in Israel, they're going to lockdown. Even they don't care if they're 70% vaccinated. They're going to lockdown if Lambda surges.
What's the difference between Lambda and Delta? I know nothing about the Lambda variant.
Yeah, so Lambda is this other new variant that is increasing in South America and a few countries. And it's in the U.S. too, but it's not as fast-moving as Delta, but it could be potentially aggressive. So they're trying to see, can we hold Lambda in check? But if Lambda is outpacing Delta, and Delta is a very fast, contagious one that has basically outpaced all the previous ones, they are almost extinct. Mm-hmm. If Lambda surges and faster than Delta, that spells trouble. Basically, if it's faster than Delta, it's going to be a problem.
Is Lambda then, are you suggesting or saying that Lambda is more capable of evading vaccines or producing illness in vaccines?
We don't know for sure. Like, a lab study does not equal real world. And the problem is that with Lambda, there are some bad properties to it. Mm-hmm. It's not surging worldwide, but it's upticking, let's just say, in certain places. And, in certain ways, a Delta was upticking, and then we realized, oh, crap, this is more than just an uptick. This is going to be a global surge. And 2 million people, 3 million people in India died within just 2 months in April and May because of Delta. Right. So we have to be really wary what's on the horizon, and we have to really, really vaccinate, or else if we don't do that, we're in a world of trouble.
Right. So tell everybody you know who is vaccine hesitant, which seems like a bizarre phrase, but whatever. We need to get America vaccinated. And if you've had the 2 shots, if you can work it out with your doctor and your pharmacist, consider a 3rd shot, particularly if you're over 60. Is that the bottom line?
Yeah, many countries are doing it. I think the U.S. should do it soon, too.
Yeah. Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, epidemiologist and health economist. You can follow him at Dr. Eric Ding over on Twitter. He's got a great feed. Doctor, thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, you too.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back, Kenneth in Seattle. Hey, Kenneth, what's on your mind today?
Oh, okay. This is a small point because I learn a great deal from you. I especially appreciate your coverage of Mr. Ray Gunn. That really clarified things for me. But anyway, small point. You said nothing good comes of occupation, and for the most part, that's true. I think an exception was the United States occupation of Japan at the end of World War II. If I'm mistaken, correct me. But
my dad was part of that occupation. He was there for 2 years. He worked as the lifeguard for the officers' swimming pool. So things were not exact. It wasn't exactly a combat zone. The difference is that the emperor of Japan, who had positioned himself as a direct descendant of the creator of the human race, or at least of the Japanese part of the human race, the sun god. The emperor, at the end of the war, came out and said, "We all need to embrace the Americans." And
how about that?
I mean, it was a huge thing, and because
and it was 75 years ago, as well.
And it was the emperor who had said, before that, who had said, if you die crashing your airplane into the deck of an American aircraft carrier, you immediately go to heaven. And thus we got the kamikaze pilots toward the end of World War II as an kind of an act of desperation on the part of the Japanese. So when the emperor came out and said it's time to embrace the Americans, we not only have surrendered, but what we did was wrong. That did not happen in Afghanistan. Yes, we knocked down the government, in city after city after city, and it took about a month and a half before, I think Fallujah was the last major city to fall to the U.S. forces. But the Taliban never officially surrendered. They offered to, and George W. Bush turned that down and then moved to Iraq. And so, we just, and the Taliban never offered, I mean, they did offer to surrender, they never offered to collaborate. And that's very different from what happened in Germany and Japan.
Exactly. In fact, very great point taken. The disaster of Bush II has never been fully sized up. He was really very bad news for us. I was going to mention one other thing, if I can.
Sure.
One of your, I want to echo and enhance, if anything, something a guest said about the white traits actually being a recessive gene when we mix. That's certainly true. I'm Jewish. I'm half by genetics. I'm half or close to half Semite. We mixed with Europeans, and the mix is very healthy when in hot climates, because despite the fact that I'm blonde, I tan very readily. I put up with the heat very readily, and my father was very nearly as dark as the Habesha Ethiopians. That's a fact. And so, and anyway, as a black once asked me, what is going to be your reaction when you whites are in the minority? And I said, I know exactly what my reaction will be. It'll be a shrug. There it is.
Yeah, we're all just people here, and that's the message that we have to, that white people have to figure out. Is it black people, brown people, however you want to define people, Asian, whatever. We're all just people here, right?
That's exactly right.
There are different, these differences are superficial. They don't have to do with how your brain is organized. And it's well documented. There you go. Kenneth, thank you very much for the call. It's good to hear from you. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We will continue. I've got to tell you about what's going down in Alabama, and then I'll be picking up your phone calls. So stick around. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. I have to tell you about this. I'm on Donald Trump's email list, right? Back in 2015 when he was running in the presidential primary. And I thought, this guy is, he's going someplace. He's getting, and particularly he was going someplace because he was being critical of the Republican Party itself. And so I sent, as I recall, it was $15, maybe it was $5. It was one or the other. To his campaign. And I've been on his email list ever since. In fact, they keep telling me I'm one of your top, you're one of our top supporters, Fred. I signed up as Fred Flintstone. And so I'm still getting them, right? I mean, they started up in a big way about a month and a half, 2 months ago. I told you about it on the air. And now it's up to 2 and 3 of them a day, fundraising emails that I'm getting from Donald Trump. He raised $100 million in the first 6 months of the year. And obviously he's trying to double or triple that. So now he's got this super spreader event coming up in Alabama on Saturday, on this weekend. Alabama, which has the lowest COVID vaccination rate in the nation, 35%. And Donald Trump is going down there. I've gotten at least 5 invitations from him. Actually, I'm starting to get some now to Thom Hartmann as well as to Fred Flintstone. So, apparently they're buying email lists. Sean, you're nodding. You're getting solicitations from them, too, and you never sent them money. And Trump is saying to me, we've got a seat reserved for you, Thomas. And Fred, of course, is getting them as well. Slightly different emails, actually, in some cases. And down in Alabama, they are scared to death. They are really worried about this. The administrator of the Alabama Department of Public Health's Northern District, a woman by the name of Judy Smith, told the Alabama newspapers, the website is al.com, the Alabama paper there, quote, "We are absolutely shivering in our boots. We have great concern." She said, "Sadly enough, we're pulling our teams together right now to do additional testing because we know what's going to happen. And it's not just going to be Cullman County, which is where the Trump rally this weekend, the super spreader event's going to be. Those folks, if they give it to each other, they're going to take it back to their home counties." And so Alabama is sitting here going, Donald Trump is coming to town. It means it's going to be a no-mask super spreader event in the middle of the Delta part of the pandemic in the state with the lowest vaccination rate in the United States. And, this is like really, really unhealthy, right? This is just definitely not a good thing for us at all. Last year, researchers concluded that 18 Trump rallies, the 18 Trump rallies that they studied, led to more than 30,000 COVID deaths that they could directly attribute, and over 700 deaths. Trump's rallies last year killed at least 700 people. And now we've got the Delta variant, which is even worse. So, here it's coming, right? The super spreader event. Donald Trump and his death cult are planning a super spreader event for Saturday, and he's bringing the Delta variant Kool-aid. This is like, Jim Jones announcing, "Hey, everybody, it's time to have a cup of the Kool-Aid." Donald Trump is saying, "Hey, everybody, it's time to have come and give me a good cheer. Take a deep breath, fill your lungs, and you let it out." 41% of the COVID cases in Alabama right now are in people between the ages of 21 and 49. In their 20s, 30s, and 40s. 41%, almost half of all the COVID cases in Alabama. This is what the Delta variant does. It is infecting children. Children's hospitals across the country, or at least children's hospitals in red states and counties, are overflowing. They're overwhelmed. Their ICUs are jammed. And now the officials in Alabama, as quoting the Alabama Department of Public Health, we are absolutely shivering in our boots. Why isn't Trump being called out for this? Why isn't America horrified that he's going to do a super spreader event in the least vaccinated state in the union? Why isn't the media calling this what it is? This is like Jim Jones inviting people to drink the Kool-Aid. This is Donald Trump saying, "Come and commit suicide," or come and spread this disease to your friends and neighbors and help them die. This goes beyond deplorable. This is criminal, or at least morally criminal. You know, I get it that, you know, over on Fox News, Tucker and his friends are all outraged that brown people are coming to America to replace white people. Why aren't they outraged that Donald Trump is running a super spreader event?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
Oh, that's right. They're all fully vaccinated, and Fox has its own vaccine passport. But they don't want to talk about it. Can't talk about it.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified. We have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, Natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle-down hadn't worked. But gush-up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Astonishing news out of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that has to do with the lifespan of Americans. Since World War II, the average lifespan of American men and women have continuously increased, all the way up to 78.8 years in 2019. Continuous increase. Things were getting better, more and more people were getting health care, we were making medical technology advances, there was a rather dramatic decline in smoking between the 1990s and the 2010s. All kinds of things were working together. And then came Donald Trump's response to COVID-19, causing America, with 4% of the world's population, to have 20% of the world's deaths. The result of that has been extraordinary. For the first time since World War II, American life expectancy has declined. It's all over in a new video for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A couple of quick notes I just wanted to share with you. The first is that the Trump hotels in Miami, Chicago, and Hawaii have all issued mask mandates. Oh, my God. It's just number one. And number two, I was telling you about the great replacement theory. I don't think this is getting anywhere near the coverage that it needs on national media. By the way, I was in my last rant about Alabama and Trump, I said, I haven't seen anything in the national media about Trump having this super spreader event on Saturday in Alabama. And somebody tweeted me that MSNBC was literally talking about it at the same time I was. Good on them. Let's hope it gets, wider distribution. But back to the great replacement theory. Steve Bannon, of course, since Trump pardoned him for scamming the donors with that phony let's build a wall thing where they raised millions of dollars and just put it in their own pockets, Trump gave him a get-out-of-jail-free card, so now he's doing a radio show. And seriously. And he had something to say about this. And he had Marjorie Taylor Greene on his program. This is what Bannon said. He said, that photo of the 800 people on the plane, there were only 150 Americans. And the question is, where are they taking these people that helped us in Afghanistan, the commandos, the interpreters, all that? You got to stay in the region. No need for anybody to come to the good old United States of America. No need to come to Wisconsin or Texas. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene goes on, and she references Ilhan Omar. Now, Ilhan Omar was born in Somalia, grew up in a refugee camp in Somalia, and emigrated to the United States under the refugee visa program, became a citizen, I believe, became a citizen of the United States. Actually, I don't know the details of how she became a citizen, so I shouldn't qualify that at all. But in any case, she came from a refugee camp in Somalia to the United States. She is a U.S. citizen, and she's a member of Congress, and she's black. So, and she's Muslim. So keep all that in your mind as you hear this quote from Marjorie Taylor Greene on Steve Bannon's program this morning. She said, quote, "And we don't have to hear about refugees being brought into our country, leading to the likeness of Ilhan Omar." Was I using Ilhan Omar's name? Or yeah, okay. Becoming members of Congress one day. And we don't have to hear about refugees being brought into our country leading to the likeness, in other words, a black face? Is that what she means? Of Ilhan Omar becoming members of Congress one day? Oh my God, more black people to become members of Congress? And then Florida Representative Anthony Sabatini, another right-wing Trump hole, says, "Any Republican that doesn't fight against the plan to bring 100,000 Afghans into our country must be primaried. Every GOP official must go on record now." The great replacement theory. These guys are hysterical. They are absolutely hysterical. And, well, anyway. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind today? Nicholas? I am not hearing Nicholas. Let's try another call and make sure everything's working. Patrick in East Lansing, Michigan. Patrick, you are on the air. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much thank you for covering the Afghan war as well as you have, Tom. And I just wanted to mention three things that I'm finding missing from the New York Times and Washington Post coverage. That is that, well, not the Washington Post, but the Vietnam syndrome. I know you know what that means, where we all said under Reagan that we got to be ready to fight these imperial wars again. I'm wondering why we're not talking about the Afghan papers and the real Vietnam War syndrome, because the Afghan papers that the Washington Post published with Craig Whitlock getting all the interviews with the 400 insiders that ran the war revealed that the people in the Bush and the Obama White House and even under Trump understood that they could not win this war. They did not have a plan to win this war. And they quote Doug Lute, who was the czar for the Afghan war, the three-star general in the White House under Bush and Obama. And he said, "We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing."
Yes.
And then it goes on to say that they developed a plan to deliberately and persistently lie to the American people, and it chronicles all of the lies. Now, this came out in 2019. The book with all the transcripts is going to be released on August 31st. Why isn't this being covered? And I'm just asking that question because 80% of Americans supported the Afghan war, and don't we have to conclude that they supported it because they were being systematically lied to? And isn't Biden's surprise over the collapse of the Afghan army just the collapse of those lies? And I only had one other thing to say.
Well, let me
very important.
Before you get to your one other thing, and I'll keep you on the air here to do that. I agree with you, and I think it needs more coverage. And we were within 6 months of our being in Afghanistan, if I'm reading that, those notes correctly, or certainly within a year, the Bush administration, the Bush-Cheney administration knew that there was no way to, quote, win Afghanistan. And they lied about it for the next 7 years. And then the Obama administration ignored that and basically lied to the American people for 8 years because they didn't, Obama didn't want to have what's happening right now to Biden happening on his watch, even in his second term. And then the Trump administration not only lied about it, but made the situation far worse by cutting the Afghan government out of the loop and negotiating directly with the leader of the Taliban, who he had ordered Pakistan to let out of prison. Who by the way, just arrived in Afghanistan to claim his country back. So, yeah, we have been lied to about this literally from the beginning. I mean, in the beginning, Bush said, "Oh, we're gonna take down the Afghan government because they're harboring bin Laden and they know what happened and they had some role in 9/11." And it turns out that at the time, bin Laden was in Pakistan getting dialysis, number one. Number two, the 9/11 plan was not hatched in Afghanistan. It was, bin Laden wrote the checks, and he was probably in Afghanistan at that time. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was doing his work in Peshawar in Pakistan, which is where we finally caught him, by the way. And in Germany, in Hamburg, Germany. And then, he and Mohammed Atta made the final plans in Venice, Florida. And this is all a matter of public record. But the Bush administration lied us into Afghanistan. So anyway, your final point, Patrick.
My final point is I agree with everything you said, and thank you so much for that. The second part is about the cost of this war, and the lead is from NBC News reporting and some others who have said correctly that we spent more on the Afghan war than we spent to rebuild Europe under the Marshall Plan after World War II.
Correct.
So I tracked this down, and I read the Special Inspector General of the Afghan Reconstructions report, a guy named Sopko, S-O-P-K-O. And, he said that there's no accounting of this war expenditure, that the military keeps saying $88 billion. It's really $113 billion, according to him. But then I looked at the Brown Cost of War Project, and they have put together a number that the U.S. government has not disputed. Initially, they did dispute it for 5 years. Now they're not disputing it. And Trump and Biden picked up this number, saying we spent over $1 trillion. Well, they put the number at the Cost of War Project at $934 billion, which was Department of Defense, State Department, USAID, but excludes the CIA and the Department of Veteran Affairs. Biden finally gave up the ghost and said it's over $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So my question is, why aren't we talking about this? Because that's why we didn't rebuild water systems and highways and schools. That's why we don't have the good things in this country. And nobody mentions the 70,000 Afghan and Pakistani civilians killed, as if they don't exist and these places are unpeopled that we've invaded. They talk about 2,400 U.S. soldiers died, but they don't talk about 20,589 wounded.
Right.
And the 775,000 soldiers that went to Afghanistan for the U.S. are all suffering some measure of trauma. So how do we count the loss? And why aren't we counting the loss and learning the lessons?
And by the way, this is ongoing in Iraq. Right, Iraq is next.
Iraq. If I can just say, my teacher in college was Larry Lindsay, who was Bush's economic advisor. He put a $200 billion cost on the Iraq War in the first 18 months, and Secretary of State Rumsfeld said, "Oh no, it's really only $50 billion. You're out," and they kicked him out. They fired him.
Right.
Well, the real number was at the lowest number, 280 billion for Iraq, and this was the budget office, the Congressional Budget Office, and the USGAO, and this was in year 3. And then Stiglitz wrote his thing saying, no, the lowest number is 500 billion. And then Stiglitz wrote a book when we got to year 7 saying it's nowhere less than a $3 trillion war.
Yeah.
So where do we get the money for this?
Yeah, I'm seeing estimates that on these two wars, we have spent somewhere between $3 and $5 trillion. And depending on whose numbers you're using and how you're defining it. And imagine what we could have done between $3 and $5 trillion. I mean, that's this entire kind of Green New Deal thing that the Democrats are talking about passing through reconciliation. It could have ended all student debt in the United States. Thank you, Patrick. It could have ended all student debt in the United States. It could have ended all medical debt. We have 500,000 families who go bankrupt because somebody got sick in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that does that. Why aren't we, why aren't we talking about the cost of this? Not just the human cost, the financial cost as well. The only people who benefited are the defense contractors.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, if you had stock in Halliburton or Raytheon, you're sitting pretty, right, for the last 20 years. But everybody else, no, not so much. And welcome back. Let's see here. Lynn in Kansas City, Kansas. Hey, Lynn, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
I was just getting really annoyed with the Biden.
What Biden bashing are you talking about? Lynn, your phone is breaking up. Is there anything you can do to, I don't know if you need to stand in a different place or slightly.
Am I any better?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. Even you mentioned that you thought, Biden had enough heads up of all this that it should have been handled better. But
I believe he did.
I'd like to remind everybody that Biden didn't get to enjoy a regular transition.
You're right.
He had a lot of stuff kept from him.
Oh, he was completely locked out of the Pentagon and all the intelligence briefings until January 20th when he became president. But January 20th was 7 months ago.
Yeah, I'll give you that, but I still think, you can plan all you want, but then when it really happens, you have to go with what's happening. And not understanding how fast the, supposed government of Afghan and its, fighters would drop to the Taliban, it is obviously a mistake on all of,
Well, this is what I wrote yesterday. If Biden's advisors, I mean, you can't expect Joe Biden to be omniscient, right? He doesn't know everything. He has to take advice through the, through the channels, right? Through the CIA, the FBI, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security, or the NSA, National Security Agency. They tell him what's up.
And all the traitors that were in there.
Right, and if they were so incompetent that they didn't know what, when the New York Times has been reporting on this, but our intelligence agencies didn't know that ever since Donald Trump cut this deal with the Taliban back in the middle of 2019, that the Taliban has been traveling across the country telling people, don't worry, just hang out, hang on to your weapons, keep taking those checks from the American government via the Afghan government, because when they do finally pull out on May 1st, which was, the deal that Trump signed, Biden just extended it here to August. But when they do finally pull out, the Taliban was telling people in cities literally all over Afghanistan, when they do finally pull out, we're going to come in, and if you set down your weapons, and all is good. And that's exactly what happened. We had 350,000 people in the Afghan military, 700,000 people in the employ of the Afghan government altogether. And in a week, every single one of them said, okay, that's it, I give. And it was because the Taliban and Donald Trump set this up. How did Biden's advisors not know this?
Because Americans in general think that everybody wants democracy that we have, and that these people couldn't possibly drop their weapons and go with the Taliban after being so oppressed.
Well, hopefully we've learned our lesson, Lynn.
Well, we don't. Years after years, decades after decades.
I know, but I don't view telling the truth about this as Biden bashing. I mean, Biden wasn't my choice in the Democratic primary, but I'm a big fan of his, as he's running his presidency right now. I think, though, that if we can't tell the truth about the people on our side, just like we try to tell the truth about the people on the other side, we're going to have a problem going forward.
Yes, but you have to stipulate that is a large complex of people that are making these decisions, not one man.
Well, that's why in my op-ed yesterday and on the air yesterday, I said, if Biden's advisors didn't see this coming, he needs to fire them from Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin on down. Somebody needs to be held accountable for this. Lynn, thank you very much for the call.
Okay, Tom.
Good talking to you. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now, and this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Rama in Williamstown, Vermont. How is the first producer of the Thom Hartmann program doing today, Rama?
I'm doing good.
Sean is bowing to you over here. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Listen, I'm doing good, but I'm not the first producer of your show. You and Luis were the first producers of your show.
Okay, but you helped us put this show together. You helped us get it on the air. And you were a radio guy. You were on the air in Vermont at the time. In fact, I was a guest on your show. I just want to honor and acknowledge all that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Tom. And it was I will take to my grave how special it was to be at the beginning of something that's turned out as big as what you've got going. But that's not why I called.
So what's up?
I called because I just want to ask a question for those that think that if they think this current pullout out of Afghanistan is too messy and reflects badly on Biden, I'd just like to ask folks, what is the end of a protracted war supposed to look like?
Exactly.
And give me some historical examples,
Exactly.
Wars end in super messy ways, and we can go through every war in history we want. They all end in messy, messy, messy ways. This Afghanistan is actually ending much, much cleaner and less violently than I ever could have imagined it ending.
Yeah. And if somebody wants to start slinging blame around for the end of the war, we really need to be talking about the beginning of the war, because this war would not be ending if it didn't happen. And go ahead.
Absolutely, and that's one big reason. And listen, you and I, we've gone over this Bush-Afghanistan invasion with other people, not necessarily between us, for 2 decades now. But I will tell you, for right now, I'm going to forget about that, other than to make the bigger statement that one reason for not starting a war is how they end. Yeah. And everything in between. So I think let's stop beating up on Joe Biden. I think part of the reason he's done things that are getting him slack is because he was facing a lot of pushback from people that had a lot of money at stake by staying in Afghanistan. And there was a lot of the military people that wanted to stay in there and, furnish their military credentials. And I do think that part of what Biden had to do was push back and say, no, we're going.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the really important points that James Madison made is that war is the time when you have the most rapid promotions in the military. It's the time that a lot of money is made by people who profit off war. It's a time that the leaders of the war see their popularity radically increased. He referred to it as the laurels that they want to wear upon their brow. And, like Caesar did. He was spot on, and you said it so well. Rama, thank you. Thank you for helping us start this program, and thanks for calling in today. It's always great talking to you. Thank you, my brother. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind? You got a super spreader event. Is that going to be anywhere near you?
No, Coleman is north of Birmingham. It's about a 4-hour drive from here.
Well, that's some small relief, I'm guessing.
Yes, but you need to think about the fact that Coleman County is very rural. A couple years ago, the town of Coleman got hit very badly by a tornado and just tore the town apart. Mm-hmm. But this event is supposed to be out in a field with food and cold drinks and music. And we have a lot of pop-up thunderstorms every afternoon. Mm. And I would not want to be standing on a stage with an electric guitar.
Oh, no, God forbid.
But no, this thing is supposed to be out in the boonies, and it can draw people from Tennessee, northern Mississippi, northern Georgia. And so it can spread, into all 4 states.
Yeah.
And I'm really hoping that people ignore this thing, and maybe it will be, if we're lucky, it will be canceled. You know.
Well, yesterday was the last time I got a personalized invitation. President Trump wants to see you in Alabama. And,
well, did you get your reservation?
Pardon?
Did you fill out your reservation form?
I probably should have.
Your tickets?
I probably should have. I didn't. No.
Yeah. Well, if this turns into a very rainy event, like we just had Fred go up the east side of the state dumping rain. Okay, I'm just wondering how many of those four-wheel drive pickup trucks will get stuck in the field.
Oh, no. Yeah, this has the potential to be a visual disaster. Interesting.
One thing, Tom,
Yeah.
one thing.
Quick.
Why aren't there any questions about Building 7 and the controlled demolition of the building?
I'm not sure. I think that has been answered, Norma, and I don't think it was controlled demolition. But that's a whole nother topic, and I really don't want to drill into 9/11 today. But thank you so much for the call. It's good talking to you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, The Rise of the New Global Super-Rich and the Fall of Everyone Else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scop poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap-and-trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that y'all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark money, the hidden history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right. Jane.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, Ron DeSantis is apparently has evolved a symbiotic relationship. The Republican governor of Florida has apparently developed a symbiotic relationship with Fox so-called News, and is, I'd say, fairly openly running for president in 2024 as the next Trump. And Trump, of course, likes to take credit for making DeSantis governor. He gave him his endorsement, and that helped him in the primary and then got him elected. He won by 34,000 votes after his Republican predecessors purged about 1 million Democrats or people from the voting rolls in Florida. So, is Florida changing? I don't know. We'll see. They're passing these restrictive voting laws. But there's this extraordinary level of coordination. Eric Kleefeld is writing about this over at MediaMatters.org between Ron DeSantis and Fox News. And not only that, DeSantis now has not only banned private businesses from requiring people to wear a mask to come in or requiring people to be vaccinated, but he's also now promoting Regeneron. Now, Regeneron is the monoclonal antibody treatment that Donald Trump and Chris Christie and Rudy Giuliani all got when they got sick with COVID. They all went to the hospital and they got this infusion, and it's got to be given by infusion. They put a tube into your vein, and it's sort of like what you get in the hospital, where they drip saline in. They put a tube into your vein, and they slowly drip this into your body over the course of a half hour or thereabouts. And it is synthetically made antibodies, monoclonal. They're synthetically made antibodies that attack or prevent the coronavirus from replicating. I don't know the exact mechanism, but anyhow, they deal with infection. And if you take these monoclonal antibodies in the early stages of an infection, when it's just, sore throat and fatigue, then it doesn't progress to the ICU and to death. People who use these actually work. But here's the thing. Why would you promote a very expensive, it's thousands of dollars per administration. You've got to have an infusion center, which is expensive. You've got to buy the Regeneron from the company that makes it. Why would they be promoting a cure when they could have prevented the disease in the first place by encouraging people to get vaccinated? Why is Ron DeSantis not out there? I get it. He acknowledged once that the vaccines were useful. But why is he not launching a major campaign across Florida to get people vaccinated? Why instead is he promoting Regeneron? There's a whole article about this over at Media Matters, him and Fox News. They're therapeutics. It's all about therapeutics. Well, over at the top of Democratic Underground today is a graphic. They have a graphic there every day on the weekdays. And this one's titled, Funny How That Works. I'll just read it to you. The top part's got a picture of Ron DeSantis. And it says, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been discouraging masking and downplaying COVID vaccines, the best, most effective way to protect people from COVID, and has instead suddenly started urging Floridians to use Regeneron's very expensive monoclonal antibody treatment after getting infected. And then the bottom half of the graphic shifts to another picture of a guy by the name of Ken Griffin. And the text says, you'll be amazed to learn that the second largest investor in Regeneron is Citadel Investment Group, whose billionaire CEO, Ken Griffin, just happens to be Ron DeSantis' #1 political donor. Mic drop. Right? This is what's going on. This is what these guys are up to. And it's nuts. And it may well be criminal. Although probably the Supreme Court says, oh, that's just free speech. But here we are. Picking up your phone calls. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind?
Thomas, thank you for taking this recall.
Sure.
As you're aware, when I first heard you say Nicholas in San Cristobal, the call dropped immediately before.
Yeah. Murphy's Law.
This is a question for you. Because of some phone calls I was getting last night. The most serious from my ex, who's Irish, but who got his master's in the politics of American elections at Villanova, who's been following all this forever. He is absolutely convinced, and so this is the question to you, are you, or to what degree are you concerned that the election in 2022, the midterms, and the 24 have now been forfeited because of the absolute egregious screw up in the evacuation of the helpers, if you will, helpers and boats, from Afghanistan? This guy is completely rabid at this point. And then I got 2 other emails from equally normally completely calm, rational people, identically convinced. It's over. It's done. He just bought us the farm. What do you think? I mean, is it as serious as they are thinking? Are they suddenly, for the first time in their lives since I've known any of these people, are they going histrionically hyperbolic or what? Or are we in serious danger of losing the complete narrative here? That's the question partly. How do we regain the narrative and the upper hand of this?
Well, there's a couple of dynamics at work here, Nicholas. Number one, you've got people who, I think we all have PTSD from 2016 when, we were just fully expecting Hillary Clinton to walk away with it. And then it was like, oh, my God. And then number one. Number two, you've got, 18 now Republican states that have passed laws allowing them to basically throw out election results and mess with elections and, forbid people from electing. So there's that, you've got all this pressure. And of course, the Trump holes are on the march. And Trump has not been held accountable for any of his crimes so far in any meaningful way. So all of those things kind of prime people for hysteria. I think that what we need to keep in mind is how short the memory of Americans are, generally speaking.
That's my hope.
And if the election were held next month, I think your friend's hysteria probably would be justified. But the Biden administration now has a few weeks in order to, and the Afghan government, the new Afghan Taliban government, has a few weeks to work this thing out and get these people out of the country, as many of them as possible. Ideally the full 86,000 that the No Left Behind group has identified. And at least 20, 30,000 of them, the ones that are accessible and more easily identified. If we can get at least them out, then Biden might not just come out of this okay. He might come out of it smelling like a rose. A lot's going to depend on the execution.
I'm hoping for the old Gore Vidal quote, the United States of amnesia. But boy, I was having no luck with these 3 people last night. They are determined that I am wrong and they're right, and that we have bought the farm.
Well, we'll see.
So I'm with you. I agree with what you're saying. I absolutely agree. But boy, I couldn't convince them, and they got me.
I think that they are figuring out at the White House how politically destructive this is. And they have to clean this up, and they have to clean it up right now. And they have to do it and it has to be real. It can't just be cosmetic. And that's going to require some kind of collaboration with the new Taliban government, because right now they've got, a few thousand people sitting at the airport in Kabul, but that's the tip of the iceberg. And to get anybody beyond that airport at Kabul, which is the only part of Afghanistan that we now have secured, to get anybody from anywhere else is going to require the cooperation of the Taliban, as distasteful as that sounds.
How do we get the people from elsewhere in Afghanistan to the airport now?
Well, the Taliban government is going to have to go along with this, and if they refuse to go along with it, it's going to put Biden in a real tough position. But we've got a lot of carrots to offer them. On the other hand, China is offering them carrots, and Russia has reached out and said they want a strategic alliance with the Taliban, and they will probably be arguing, don't go along with Biden. So, there's a lot of moving parts here, Nicholas. I got to run. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour, back with more of the news of the day, a crazy alert, and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. I enjoy your program. If I can, I'm going to try to make 2 quick points, and then I'll jump off so you can get to somebody else. The first one is that when I was growing up, there was a saying that old folks used to say that, you start smelling yourself. In other words, you know, you think you're becoming a man or you're a man before your time. And what I'm trying to say about that is the idea that people with big money, political will always come together and always see a cause to come together to go to war about, to try to reshape the world in their own image, what that conceivably be their images. And so it's sort of like a manifest destiny kind of thing, a variance on that people who have power and money want to weld it. The other thing I wanted to jump in on, it was quickly, is that I don't agree with you and a previous caller that suggests that if we hadn't spent this money in Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan, not Iran, but I mean, you know what I'm saying, that the Republican Party would let us spend a dime more than what they're going to do for social. Yeah,
I think you're right, Earl.
So those are the 2 points I wanted to make.
Probably the national debt would not be as large as it is. You know, it would probably be about $5 trillion less if we hadn't had a war in Afghanistan or Iraq. But I think you're right about that. With regard to the whole class thing, what you're defining is class consciousness and, you know, economic class, people hanging together. And they do that. They absolutely do that. So thank you for that, Earl. And thanks for the call. Karen in Oakland, California. Hey, Karen, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I love your show. I love you. And thank you for the Afghanistan occupation versus war. That was great.
Thank you.
So anyway, I wanted to talk about your 9/11 caller. I think he was just seriously misunderstood because I think he thought because of the nose of the plane didn't break when it hit the building. I think it's pretty much because he hasn't updated his construction materials knowledge, because that was not the Empire State Building built in 1930 of concrete, really. I mean, the concrete floors are there, but basically the walls are like pre-manufactured panels and glass. That's it.
Right.
And then just people and interior walls. There's nothing in that to bend the nose of the plane. I just think that's really what was going on with him.
Well,
I just wanted to share that.
That's a good point. And I would add on Building 7 that the Building 7 had an emergency backup generator and a large collection of diesel fuel or tank of diesel fuel on its roof. And apparently that caught on fire as a result of debris coming from the other two buildings. And that's what my understanding, according to the 9/11 report, that's what took down Building 7. And
not to mention the fact that it was a cross-country flight with a full-loaded fuel tank, right?
Well, that took down the two towers, but no airplane hit Building 7, and then Building 7 came down, and people say, oh, that was controlled demolition, and from what I've read, it was actually the debris, the flaming debris being scattered onto that building. The building catches on fire. The fire, the diesel fuel starts going down the central elevator shaft, which is where the primary struts are, the reinforcing things that hold the building up, going up through the center of it, and it just melted and collapsed like the other two buildings. But I don't want to initiate a whole debate about this. I'm not an expert on this. This is just what I've read. But Karen, thank you.
Right, and I don't know about construction, but I can see it's panels and glass.
Sure, there you go. Yeah, it's common sense. Thank you, Karen. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Republican Party has sold themselves way back, all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour, and time for a crazy alert. People are worried about the contamination of the blood supply. Oh no, are we going to turn into lizard people? With nearly 60%, this is from Kaiser Health News, with nearly 60% of the eligible U.S. population fully vaccinated, most of the nation's blood supply is now coming from people who've been vaccinated, inoculated, which has led some patients who are skeptical of the shots to demand transfusions only from the unvaccinated. Honest to God. Julie Katz-Karp, who is with the Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia, said, "We are definitely aware of patients who have refused blood products from vaccinated donors." Emily Osment, American Red Cross spokesperson, says that her organization, the Red Cross, has fielded questions from clients worried that vaccinated blood is going to be tainted. Right. The latest crazy conspiracy theory. It is, as I said, it is crazy. And, but here we are. I mean, it's America and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. Okay, back to picking up your phone calls. Marilyn in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this issue of Biden being sort of blindsided here with what happened. Mm-hmm. You mentioned how it was hard to believe that Blinken and the Secretary of Defense couldn't have known anything about this. And I'm just wondering, is it possible that intelligence gatherers, either in the Pentagon, the Defense Intelligence Agency, CIA, NSA, that somebody along the way suppressed information because they wanted to stay in there and they wanted a military incident?
Or because they were Trump appointees and they wanted to sabotage Biden.
Exactly. I thought of that also. Yeah. One or the other.
I think those are both possibilities, Marilyn, and in small ways they may play a part of this, but it's been 7 months that Joe Biden has been president, and it was in March when this group, No More Left Behind, I forget the exact words, I saw the founder of it on MSNBC several times yesterday, and Sean has reached out to them. I'm hoping that we can get them on to talk about this. But it was in March.
There was a guy on MSNBC yesterday, and he was saying, bring in the Marines, bring in the whole 82nd Airborne.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounded to me like he was giving a military point of view here, so I'm just wondering if that played into this.
Well, yeah, he certainly was. He was a military guy. And sometimes when the only tool you have is a hammer, you think that every problem is a nail. I think that this is something that could probably be negotiated with the Taliban, but I may be completely wrong. What I do know is that they need to be using every tool at their disposal, whether it's diplomatic or whether it's military or something in between. There are also other parties in the region that the Taliban has to interact with, the largest being Pakistan, which is where the Taliban was invented and where it is headquartered and where it's a major force in the Pakistani government. And we give a lot of money to Pakistan every year. We subsidize them. We support them. Their military uses our weaponry. And Pakistan has extraordinary influence and power over the Taliban, and we need to be using every tool that we have to get those folks out. And if we don't, if the Biden administration doesn't, it is going to hurt them. Whether it was the result of Trump holdovers sabotaging them, or incompetent people, or people who simply didn't want the war to end because, hey, it was a gravy train, it was the road to promotions for people in the military, it was money for the defense contractors. All of these things, in my mind, kind of throw into the pot. But the bottom line, and Biden cut through this very well yesterday. He said, I'm not going to pass this along to a fifth U.S. president. God bless him. I mean, it needed to be said. But the fact that they are, I remember a month ago on MSNBC having Rachel Maddow have the same guy on her show, and he was saying, we need to get these people out now. Now, this was before, we had started the pullout. And he was saying, we need to get them out. I've got their names. We know who they are. We know where they are. And the Biden administration was apparently not listening. And I think that was a tragedy. And and he has an opportunity to fix this. If he doesn't make this right, if the Biden administration doesn't make this right, it's going to be Jerry Ford all over again. Jerry Ford was a one-term president largely because of what happened in Saigon.
Mm-hmm.
And this was,
and also because of Nixon, the pardon. A lot of people didn't like the pardon.
Yeah, that's true.
Whatever.
That's true.
You're right. He has to clean it up no matter what happened, no matter who was responsible. He has to clean it up.
Yeah, and I think
I think he will.
Yeah, and I sure hope so. Marilyn, thank you for the call. And
Thank
I think
you.
yeah,
Thank you.
and I think that what Nicholas was saying about his friends who are hysterical, that this is this is Jerry Ford all over again. Jerry Ford didn't have the means or the will or the popular support for helping the people in Saigon who had helped us. And it never even became part of the conversation. This is really an entirely different time with an entirely different dynamic. There was no social media back then, and an entirely different, frankly, populace. So hopefully it'll turn out differently.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this. Your thoughts on all these issues today? And do you know anybody who's afraid to get blood from vaccinated people?
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, a.k.a. brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the, after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Wayward promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
So, you know, we have our regular newsletter that you can find over at thomhartmann.com that has Sue's Daily Stack in it, which lists a link to every article, every story that I talked about on, you know, whatever it may be on the program that day. And then there's also my daily rant, which can come into your email box, no advertisements, no cost, over at hartmannreport.com. In addition to that, we have a weekly video that we post over at thomhartmann.com for people who, you know, are supporters of our program. And the one this week is particularly fascinating. A federal judge has said that Betsy DeVos has to come in and sit for a 3-hour deposition. Now, the Biden Justice Department said former cabinet secretary shouldn't have to do this. And the judge said, no, the record keeping was so shoddy during the Trump administration. So what's up next? Well, let's hope it's Bill Barr being dragged before a court. You can check it all out at thomhartmann.com. Oh, this is interesting. The Chiron on CNN right now says the White House is talking to the Taliban to determine timeline for evacuations. What I was recommending 10 minutes ago. So, you know, hopefully it'll work out. Hopefully it'll work out. There's, you know, a lot of lives there and, you know, a lot going on. Paula in Zillah, Washington. Hey, Paula, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Paul,
this is Paul.
I'm sorry. My apologies.
Yeah, calling from my organic solar-powered winery this morning.
Oh, very cool.
You've had some great conversations. We also require vaccination and masks.
Paul, before you get into your topic, then, a question for you. As a regular consumer of wines, do you ship out of state? And if so, how do I find your winery?
paradisosdelsol.com, and we'd love to send you some wine.
Paradisos, spell it.
PARADISOSDELSOL.com.
You got it. I'll be over there when we get off the air today.
Or you can call me. You got my phone number.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's good. I'll check the website. Thank you, Paul. So, your topic.
Well, you've had a couple of people talking about the cost to the American taxpayers, the blood and treasure we spent in this debacle of Afghanistan. Another way of looking at it is, how much did we spend for the population of Afghanistan? The number I'm using is $1 trillion. I'm pretty sure it's more than that because we don't know what the CIA spent. And it's going to be way more because we're going to be paying for this war, for this occupation, for another 50 years. If you take $1 trillion and divide it by the 18 million population of Afghanistan, we have spent $55,500 for every man, woman, and child living in Afghanistan. Maybe we could have done something more useful with that money in Afghanistan, not counting what we could have done with $1 trillion here in the U.S.
Back in 2000.
And I think it really.
I'm sorry. Finish.
Go ahead.
No, finish your thought. I thought you were done, Paul. I'm sorry.
Well, I think I take it right back to the last true Republican president we had, Dwight Eisenhower, as he left office, warned us about the military-industrial complex. And as you and other people have mentioned today, there's a lot of money in war. China's taken a different approach, and China always has. If you look back at what China was doing 800 years ago, they come into a new country. They want to trade with them. They bring technology. They bring information. The Chinese fleets were like massive mobile Peace Corps fleets. They brought knowledge and skills and engineering to countries and helped develop them. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're going to do in Afghanistan. In 5 years, China's going to be running Afghanistan.
That's what I was predicting yesterday on the air. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're going to be taking the $3 trillion worth of gold and lithium and other rare earth minerals out of that country and taking them back to China to turn into the jewelry and computer chips.
Exactly, and they're not going to spend $55,000 for every man, woman, and child in Afghanistan with nothing to show for it.
Well, this was I wrote an op-ed back in 2001 or 2002 that was published over at commondreams.org. I'm guessing it's still up. In fact, I wrote several of them, saying that Afghanistan was, at the time that George Bush decided he'd rather have a war there than try to arrest bin Laden. Afghanistan was the second poorest country in the world behind Burkina Faso, and Burkina Faso has a whole nother story, and it's a colonial tragedy. But Afghanistan, the average income was $2 per day for the average working person in Afghanistan. $700 a year was the average income. The GDP of the entire country was $1.5 billion a year. $1.5 billion. I mean, we're spending that, every day, $1 billion, every week anyway.
We just walked off and left how many billions of dollars worth of our investments behind?
If we had simply said to the country of Afghanistan, give us bin Laden, and in fact, give us not just bin Laden, but also the 3,000 or 4,000 of his fighters that have been most recently trained at his little camp there. He had about 20,000 people who'd gone through that camp over a decade or so, but there was still apparently a few thousand of them left in Afghanistan. They had nothing to do with 9/11, by the way. They didn't even know about 9/11. This was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's project that he hatched out of Pakistan. But in any case, if we had said to Afghanistan, give us bin Laden and a couple of thousand of his fighters, and for trial in a third country, that's fine with us. We'll hold their trial in Saudi Arabia where they'll get beheaded or whatever. Or hold their trial in the Hague, in the European Court of Criminal Justice. And we will give you $10 for every man, woman, and child in Afghanistan. The country would have instantly become 5 times richer than it was. And that's a huge, that's just $10. If we had given them $100 per person, they would have, it's mind-boggling what an opportunity we blew, Paul. And your riff on how China does it and does it right is so. This is their whole Belt and Road project, and they're doing it.
Exactly. I last time I calculated what we had spent in Vietnam, It was about $76,000 for every Vietnamese citizen at the end of the Vietnam War, and that number has gone way up since then because I haven't done that calculation for probably 20 years.
Right, and you have to include the cost of taking care of American veterans for the next 50 years, which is
exactly. I mean, we've got all these people. Any American service person who has spent time in combat has issues that need treatment, and we don't have nearly enough mental health people taking care of them. You know, I mean, look at all the Vietnam veterans that were on the street and are still on the street, some of them, you know, but mostly the ones who've been on the street for a long time have died by now.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're still spending a fortune on taking care of these people that we sent off to Vietnam with.
I know, and that doesn't count the cost of the destroyed lives. That doesn't count the cost of the trauma to their families, their children growing up, in many cases parentless or with a parent who is so severely disabled that the nature of their life has been changed forever. It doesn't count, you know, any of those subtle things. Paul, I need to move along, but thank you so much for the call, and I'm going to check out paradisosdelsol.com when I get off the air here. Thank you. Again, I'm looking forward to trying out your wines. Conchita in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Hey, Conchita, what's up? If I'm saying your name right.
Hi, Tom. Yes, and last name is Ndegi, and that might be familiar since you were in Uganda. I was in Peace Corps and lived there for 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
Got married there, and my son was born there. Anyway, they said, get to the point. I agree with what you said about empire building. And we shouldn't have gone into Afghanistan or Iraq. Oil pipelines and oil and Cheney were partly behind it.
Oh, yeah.
My PhD is in African Studies from Howard University, our VP's alma mater.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm right from New Orleans, so I have a New Orleans accent.
I can hear it.
I've been listening to you since the election, and 99% I agree with most of the things. I hear you through Sirius XM, and thank you for everything you do.
Well, thank you, Conchita. Was that all you wanted to say? Did you have a specific point that you wanted to make about empire building, or you just wanted to agree that it's a bad idea?
Basically, yeah, I agree. And then the point about China going in, Afghanistan, I mean, that's the point of the Silk Road. I mean, that goes right through the old Silk Road route. And
you're right.
Yes, we made mistakes all along, and we shouldn't have gone into Afghanistan. It was purely colonial type thing and empire building, and it's just sad the way it all ended. That's all.
And we tried to do it with military force. It was crazy. When I was in South Sudan a couple of years ago, and we were up on the border with Darfur, South Sudan has oil, and while they had hired Norway to meter the oil because they had to split the money with Sudan itself, the northern country to the north of them. They were bringing in Chinese engineers, and there were Chinese people all over South Sudan, because, hey, there's natural resources here. This is going on all across the world. China is coming in and saying, America wants to bomb you. We want to make you rich. Who do you want to be friends with? And it's like, there you go.
And they stay out of the internal politics. Okay, I'm a professor at A&T. I'll keep listening to you. I've been teaching you over 30 years, and I love you. Thank you.
That's great. Conchita, thank you. Thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. And from somebody else who's also been in Uganda. Thank you so much. We'll be back. It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So I think the single most important point to understanding Afghanistan is that there's no such thing as Afghanistan. And Zbigniew Brzezinski points that out in his book, The Grand Chessboard. The single most important statement in the book is that Afghanistan is a nation-state in name only. And it's quite true. And it was designed that way along with the Balkan nations, the Central Asian nations, designed to keep people internally divided and subservient to the Soviet Union. Just in Afghanistan alone, linguistically and culturally, you have Uzbeks and Pathans and Tajiks and Pashtuns and Persians, and then you have the Hazaras and the Tajiks and the Pashtuns at each other's throats. Just geographically, it's a hybrid. It's part of Central Asia. It's also part of the Eurasian Balkans. I mean, it's like nailing Jello to the wall. It was meant to be that way. Will always be that way. And so this idea, this name, this artificiality that we've come up with of Afghanistan is a delusion. You might as well tell people to attack the North Pole and capture Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And I will say that the analogies that are being drawn on Vietnam are very superficial. I mean, there are analogies, but the analogy is very simple. The Vietnamese thought exactly the same thing that the I'll use the word Afghans think, which is that we're there to enslave them, and that we don't understand their history. I mean, that's what Robert McNamara said in his Fog of War when he went to visit Vietnam years later, and the top Vietnamese official said, have you never read a history book? Don't you know that we've been fighting with the Chinese for 1,000 years? Don't you know we'd have fought to the last man? Don't you know we wouldn't have been communists? And it's the same delusion in Afghanistan. It's just a gross ignorance, a pride of ignorance. And that's why Americans weren't lied to any more than they were lied to if you tell them there's a Santa Claus. They're just profoundly ignorant about the very basics of geography, the very basics of culture, the very basics of language. And that's why there will be all of this blame going around, and it will be all about personalities and Twitter feeds, but it's basic geography that doesn't lie. You can't lie about geography. It was Napoleon that said that to know a country's foreign policy is to know their geography, and it's objective. So that's my take on Afghanistan.
Yeah. Louise and I, our latest binge watching has been The Borgias on, I think it's on Showtime. And Italy at that time, this was in 1490s. Italy didn't exist. It was, there was the Kingdom of Naples and the Kingdom of Rome and the Kingdom of Venice and essentially. And, in fact, that was the case with most of Europe for centuries. And Afghanistan is and different languages were spoken and different religions were adopted. The Catholic Church kind of pulled it all together, but Afghanistan, yeah, absolutely. And that also doesn't acknowledge Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, which is huge.
And Pakistan is another artificiality, isn't it? Right? I mean, it's an artificiality that was created during the time of Gandhi.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the history of Pakistan, but I'll take your word for it. Jonathan, thank you. Thank you for an informed and thoughtful comment. No matter how we look at it now, we can't afford to forget that we shouldn't have been there in the first place in what we call a war. Jonathan, thank you so much. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Hey, we have a new video out about the 1776 Commission. Remember this commission that Donald Trump put together to explain the history of America, to have true principles, because history is being distorted by things like the New York Times 1619 report, No, seriously, this is what Donald Trump said, that, we're engaging now in revisionist history by highlighting the history of slavery in the United States. And so he put together this bizarre commission, and now in the state of South Carolina, Senator Dwight Loftus and others have introduced legislation requiring that Trump's commission, which had no historians on it, 18 people, not a single historian, that commission's findings be taught as history in the public schools in South Carolina. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it's like they want to take us back to the 1930s. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And And welcome back. Tim in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted to bring up the idea that war is intrinsically terrible for humans, of course. But what about the flora and fauna? My father-in-law was CIA for 35 years. And, he told me that basically the carpet bombing and napalm of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam pretty much wiped out the Asian elephants and the small Asian rhino population that existed at that time. 20 years of bombing in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran, there's endangered species that were endangered before, but now, we never hear about the devastation. I'm an animal wildlife rehabber, and you never hear about the devastation. Old growth forests, the deforestation, wiping all of these things out. It just absolutely is appalling to me. The human cost is tragic. It's terrible. The Europeans came here and wiped out 40 million buffalo to kill the Native Americans, to get them out of the area. And guess what? We planted grass and all the other junk that, lamb and everything else that the Europeans seem to.
Yeah, we terraformed North America, and civilized people, and I put that in scare quotes, around the world have been doing this for a long, long time and changing ecosystems. But war is particularly destructive. Tim, you make a great point, and I appreciate your calling and making it. Thank you. Lance in Kikots Movi Village. Where is this? And I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, Lance.
No, it's okay. Kikatmovi, I kind of say it wrong too myself. Yeah, I talked to you a few times already. Yeah, it's about 92 miles northeast of Flagstaff in northern Arizona.
Okay.
Kikatmovi, Arizona. Yeah. You're a smart guy, Tom. Tell me your honest opinion. If we would have stayed when we were secretly supplying them with weapons against the Soviet Union incursion back in the early 80s, if we would have stayed in it and at least not, just continue that and then maybe help them build hospitals and maybe an infrastructure and just not abruptly leave them, I think we would have. What do you think? It would have been completely different from now, as we're standing right now. I think, we would have better relations with Afghanistan right now instead of just helping them out and leaving them, and all of a sudden all these different factions are fighting each other. They didn't like us, involving themselves back then, and it just seemed like it just totally blew up on us. So what do you think?
I think that we need to learn a lesson from both Europe post-World War II and Cuba during the Obama administration. We reached out to Europe after the war, Germany specifically, but we helped all of Europe, but Germany was our enemy during World War II, and we reached out to our enemy and we said, we will help you rebuild your country. And Germany is now one of our most solid allies in the world. When Obama became president, he saw, hey, 50 years of stupid policy with Cuba is not working. And so he opened Cuba to the United States, to commerce with the United States. Louise and I went down and spent a week in Havana and, traveling around parts of Cuba in the neighborhood of Havana. And the response of the Cuban government to that opening by Obama was that they started legalizing free enterprise. There were all these little restaurants, these little pop-up restaurants that people were starting in their backyards, and the government was starting to come up with sanitation standards, and you couldn't serve more than 50 people. They wanted to be sure. They loved small business. They loved the idea of entrepreneurialism. They didn't want it to grow into monopolistic capitalism. They didn't want Cuba to be populated with McDonald's and Olive Gardens. And so it had to be the local owner, but it was moving in the direction of this kind of synthesis of a socialist state and a capitalist state that I thought was really healthy. And the Cuban people were really happy to see us. And there were a lot of American and European tourists there. And then Trump came in and just blew that to hell. And I think that had we applied that lesson to Afghanistan and even to Iraq, although Iraq was just a lie from the get-go. It was a lie back in Poppy Bush. His war with Iraq was based on a lie, on two lies. One, him telling Saddam that we wouldn't mind if he invaded Kuwait, and then two, saying that Saddam, that they were throwing babies out of incubators and all this kind of stuff. We've just had way too many lies, number one. And number two, it's this old, Abraham Maslow, the famous psychologist, his old saying that when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And we have thought for way too long that every problem in the world, since we have the world's largest military, is solved by the military. And it is wrong. It is just absolutely wrong. So anyhow, I've got to move along. Lance, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Stan in Champaign, Illinois. Hey, Stan, we've got about a half a minute left here, I think.
Oh, I didn't think I was going to get on. A lot of things I'd like to talk to you about. Do you want me to take you off a speakerphone?
No, Stan, I'm going to actually not. Thank you. Thanks for the call. Wow. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. It's such an extraordinary time in our history. And I think one that is going to, in many ways, turn out for the better. For us and for the world. Lessons learned, war is hell. We can do things right. We can maybe make some of this up. Let's hope. Let's all work toward that, huh? So stay involved. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. And thanks again for listening to the program today. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!